Welcome to the VEROSCOPE report today, where we're continuing with the Karen Read trial. And today we're seeing the police report, which has just come out. And attorney Melanie Little, who has a YouTube channel called Attorney Melanie Little, is the person who the other day got hold of the report from Bukhenik and showed it to the world for the first time. Here she is. Let's listen to Melanie.
They didn't get a desk, did they? Suze, did they? No.
And this is the report which you can see signed by Sergeant Bukhenik in the trial of Karen Read. And this is the police report that he made when he, inverted commas, interviewed the suspect/witness at the time, Brian Higgins. And the report is, well, listen to what Melanie has to say.
Didn't get the disc. Where's the disc? Did the disc go missing? Oops.
What we've learned is Higgins handed over a disc with the data that he chose, the suspect chose to give to the detectives, and they accepted it. And what we're going to do today is we're going to be looking at just one sentence from him, a single sentence analysis, 28 words in total. This is the sentence that we're going to be examining. This is what Bukhenik said in his report, which, by the way, he didn't write for another 8 days. But he said, Trooper Proctor, and we all know about Trooper Proctor, don't we? Trooper Proctor and I once again confirmed that John O'Keefe never entered the home and there were no arguments or fights between anyone at the residence. This is the sentence we're going to be analysing using forensic linguistics and statement analysis. We're going to see, is he lying to us? Is he gaslighting us? Where is the deception? And we're going to see, in the similar way that intelligence agencies around the world and the FBI's behavioral analysis unit examine perhaps when a serial killer writes in with an anonymous letter. What we're going to do is we're going to see how much intelligence can we get from this single sentence. And the benefit to you with following along and learning how we do this is, imagine you get an email or a WhatsApp, maybe only this long. Well, what intelligence can you gain from it? Let's start. Let's begin. We're going to do a word-by-word molecular analysis. So let's begin. He starts with Trooper Proctor and I. So let's examine that. Trooper Proctor and I. And what we do is we slow down and we actively listen. And we try and do this. You've seen Mindhunter, and you've seen how the analyst tries to, or the FBI agent in that case, tries to get into the mind of the serial killer. He tries to get rapport, or she tries to get what we call linguistic empathy with the writer. So although it's not necessarily going to be pleasant for many of us, we try and get inside Bukhenik's head. We try and understand his feelings, his fears, his worries, his concerns, his goals, his motivations, his desires, his wants. What is he thinking? That needs to be our thinking. Does that make sense? So obviously don't spend too long in his head, but try to get connected, try to get that rapport, try to get that linguistic empathy. Okay, so with that in mind, he says, Trooper Proctor and I. So we observe, Bukhenik opens with a compound subject. Don't worry about this. We're not going to get caught in the traps of labeling things. Both investigators are named as joint actors. And so there's an element of hiding in the crowd as well, we notice, in these sorts of things. What was important to Bukhenik is important to us. This is important to him. In that Trooper Proctor and I did it, not just me. They were all doing it, Mum. It's that sort of hiding in the crowd. Now, not necessarily so, because more times than often, or not, what I've just said is not true. But because very often it is, in goes the flag. And what we do is we put in flags whether it makes sense to us or not, because when we come back to it, we can see a pattern, which then might make sense. Or we might get more intelligence later on. And because we put in all the flags without judging, it helps us. It's also a good habit. And it reminds us of the skill that we're learning, because we've recognized that we've got a shared ownership construction, and therefore we might have hiding in the crowd. In goes the flag. The expected is useful, but don't get caught up in that, because otherwise you might say, well, I'm not sure if that's expected, and then you miss the point of identifying the pattern and putting in the flag. Why this matters: the brain chooses compound subject when it wants to distribute responsibility. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, but we recognize it. The psychology of shared attribution. When someone writes Trooper Proctor and I instead of just I, their brain is making a strategic choice to share ownership of action. Individual investigators write what they observed and did. Both names attached to a single verb, confirmed, creating mutual accountability to the verb and the tell. If this were routine information gathering, there's no need to specify joint authorship. You write, I asked about X, he stated Y. The compound subject reveals Bukhenik's brain knows the action in some shape or form, because essentially it's a non-investigation. The investigation's been shut down. They didn't want to investigate. They're pinning it on the girl and framing her. And this requires, through guilt and shame, a shared cover. Now, in my opinion, I suspect at this point Bukhenik doesn't know any of the facts, really, but is going along with let's convict the girl because she's killed a cop and she's not getting away with it, and that might include scattering a little bit of taillight around and, altering forms and whatever it takes. She's not getting. He might have had that mindset. Still a bit of a dirty cop in that sense that he's willing to frame, but for inverted commas, good reasons in his mind. Let's not forget these law enforcement officers, Higgins, Proctor, Tully, Lank, Deaver, and all the rest of them, aren't before the murder and before attempting to frame an innocent woman. They're not criminals necessarily, and they're not evil people necessarily. But mistakes and actions and decisions were carried out. And in my opinion, in the early, apart from those who knew, the house suspects, I think many of the law enforcement around the edges of the fit up might not have known, or were willing to ostrich and look away and help, and willing to frame because she's not going to get away with it. That sort of thing. Does that make sense? But that being said, shared cover was still required at the psychological level. Bear in mind, I could be wrong. This is just my opinion. But whether it's my opinion or not, the flag goes in, as you've been learning these last 2 or 3 days. So the neurological basis, responsibility distribution. The brain automatically distributes responsibility language when it perceives potential criticism. In professional settings, compound subjects like the team and I decided, or John and I confirmed, emerge where the individual feels uncomfortable owning the action alone. Bukhenik's brain knew what he was about to write needed a co-signer. He wrote the word once. Do you want to see the sentence again? Trooper Proctor and I once. Once again confirmed. So let's go back to once. The word once is a temporal marker indicating prior occurrence. What it reveals. Now, in case anyone is confused, language selection happens unconsciously in the Broca part of the brain responsible for language, in particular responsible in that area. So I'm told. Obviously I've only read about this. I've not actually looked. Although it would be interesting to attend an autopsy once, wouldn't it, and have a look. And have a real detail as to how this Broca area works. Perhaps I'll speak to a neuroscientist one day. And articles and pronouns, are, apart from tenses, are also almost always unconsciously chosen. And because we speak rapidly, we don't have time to. Sometimes we do, because we stop and we pause and we think and we go, now what word suits here? And then we've stopped and we're drawing from the conscious mind. And I don't have a percentage, but the vast majority of the time, 99% of the time, our words are coming from this Broca area of the unconscious. So why look at individual words in a sentence? Surely, what can that tell us? Well, the brain knows everything about what has happened. And the unconscious part of Bukhenik, chose this word from the tens of thousands of possibilities that it has. And it's a time marker, once upon a time. And it indicates prior occurrence. Remember, we're attempting to be like Sherlock Holmes or Columbo, getting every single clue we can from the language. What it reveals. This confirmation happened before. The confirmation happened before. Think about it. He used the word once. Where's the sentence? Trooper Proctor and I, hiding in the crowd, sharing responsibility, once again confirmed. But we're just looking at the once. It's happened before. We can see that because we've got again confirmed going on. But we're just looking at this word about what it tells us. The confirmation has happened before. Why would investigators need to confirm the same point multiple times with Higgins? The answer, Sherlock Holmes, they weren't gathering information. They were locking it down. Does that make sense? We see evidence from the Broca's area choosing once, a time gap, temporal lacuna, a time marker in this sense, indicating prior occurrence. They were locking down, documenting. This isn't a report. This is documenting a pre-chosen narrative. And this is breaking data. Melanie Little has only just got hold of this from Emily C, if you want to go and check out her site. Spelled S-E-E-E. Three E's. Emily C, although her real name, I understand, is only 2 E's. The mathematics of once again, requires at least 3 iterations. Once again, remember, look. Trooper Proctor and I hiding in the crowd. Once again, this has happened before, perhaps more than once. Let's see what intelligence we can gain. Once again, requires at least 3 iterations. The first time, the initial confirmation. Let's call that confirmation A. The second time, once, the prior reconfirmation, call it confirmation B, and the third time, again, this current reconfirmation. Investigators don't confirm multiple times. They ask once, they record the answer, done. Multiple confirmations reveal this is not information gathering, this is narrative locking. Once again, the unconscious mind is confusing how often this confirmation is happening because it's unusual. This is not how you investigate. Bukhenik's unconscious mind is struggling with once again confirming this. This isn't how you do an investigation. You ask and you challenge. You don't once again confirm. Not when you're first interviewing a witness or suspect. So let's look at the word again. If I'm going into too much detail or too slow, do say. Normally I do a surface level analysis of an entire transcript, but because this has just arrived, and because we're getting so much intelligence from this sentence, I thought it deserved its own analysis. Obviously, if it's warranted, let's say it really was a serial killer who had written in, to the Sunday Times or the New York Times, then we would do this level of analysis on every single word and more, obviously, because each time you go back to a statement, you see more and more. But because of the effort involved in word by word analysis to do entire transcripts without the help of software, it would take a very, very long time. However, we have the word again, and this reveals the action is being repeated now. In addition to the prior occurrences, depending on how Bukhenik's unconscious chose those words, we won't know the numbers. My gut feel is that it's just the second time, but we don't know. Questions are asked once, answers are recorded once. Follow-up questions explore new territory, or at least they should do if you want to maximize the intelligence gathered from the elicitation. People will only put up with so many questions. But here we have the same points being confirmed repeatedly. You see, if by the end of this analysis we can demonstrate that from the off, Bukhenik has not investigated, Lank has not investigated, Deva is in on it, changing her story, Deva, sorry, is in on it, changing her stories. Proctor, in on it. Tully. How far has it gone where they've crossed the line and know they're framing an innocent woman, but are prepared to do it anyway? How far has that gone? Up to the judge? Morrissey? The DA? How far has corruption gone, if corruption is there? Can we prove it? In Karen's civil trial against the House defendants, will they be able to prove that no investigation was attempted in the first place? Well, let's carry on with the forensic linguistic analysis of Bukhenik's sentence. And we'll see if we can determine a couple of things. A, is it worth doing a full forensic linguistic analysis? In other words, this level of depth, but not just on this sentence. And B, what do we discover? That proves no investigation occurred. That's what I think we're going to discover. But what we do in analysis is we keep an open mind and we believe the narrator until they talk us out of it, until they show us evidence. And obviously, so far, I've not seen any evidence, have you, that there was no intent to investigate? So we carry on. But here we have the same points being confirmed repeatedly. Now we can all begin to think, maybe there is some evidence. Maybe this word here is the smoking gun. Can you see how this can be problematic? Repetition is the signature of narrative establishment, not information discovery. So, let's look at the sentence again. Trooper Proctor and I, hiding in the crowd. Once again, this means it's happened before, but we don't know how many times. Once again, does that indicate it's only the first time? Or can you see how this could be the third time? Can you see how this is difficult unless we really analyze it? But look, here is the smoking gun. Once again. So in other words, you're not asking new questions, which is what you should do with investigation. But we're now wasting multiple times confirming. Multiple times confirming. So, confirmed. It's wrong, isn't it? Can you see? It's the confession word. This single word exposes everything about the Karen Read trial. Everything. What investigators do, they ask questions, they inquire about details, they explore circumstances, they probe for information, they investigate facts, they examine evidence, and they question witnesses. What investigators do not do, confirm predetermined conclusions. And that's what we're seeing this investigator do. Between him, Lank, and Tully, and Proctor, they've shut down any investigation. And all they're doing is confirming. This is his own word, and he could have selected tens of thousands of different words in his personal dictionary. He chose confirmed. If there was an investigation, we might have language similar to this. I asked Higgins, I inquired about any arguments. Higgins, blah, 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 stated that when asked about fights. But what we get from Bukhenik is we confirmed that John O'Keefe never entered. Not asked, not inquired, not questioned, not explored, not investigated, but confirmed. This is conclusion language. This is not investigation language. Bukhenik's unconscious has revealed the truth. There is no investigation. They're confirming the narrative. The word selection reveals the brain's true framework. Confirmed requires a pre-existing belief or conclusion. It requires an action that validates that pre-existing belief. You don't confirm what you don't already believe. You discover it. You learn it. Bukhenik's brain chose confirmed because that's what they were doing. Confirming a narrative that already existed. They were not discovering new information or investigating or taking a genuine police report. They were at Higgins's own attorney's house, probably with the Jamesons on ice, gossiping about the local sexual activities. And don't forget, it took 8 days for Bukhenik to think to himself, shit, I've got to do the bloody paperwork. This is 8 days after the interview that we're reading his report that Melanie has. This report here that Sergeant Bukhenik has signed and submitted. Bukhenik's brain chose confirmed because, as I said, that's what they were doing, confirming a narrative that had already existed. Absolutely disgusting behavior from the investigator. A woman's life was at stake here. The trauma, the damage that you've done is enormous. So, we've covered this in some detail earlier. The broker's area selects words that match the brain's internal model of reality. When someone is genuinely investigating, words like asked, learned, discovered emerge automatically because the brain models the process as information gathering. It's in rapport with itself. But when someone is confirming a predetermined narrative, confirmed emerges from the broker because the brain models the process as validation of existing belief. Bukhenik's brain knew what process he was engaged in. His word choice betrayed it. He uses the word that. Let's have a look at the sentence again. This is what was important to him and what he wrote. Trooper Proctor and I, hiding in the crowd, sharing responsibility, once again confirmed this is not investigatory language. That. Let's go and have a look at that. Remember, we've got John O'Keefe never next. Perhaps we won't have to go back to the sentence. But let's look at the word that. That. That introduces a subordinate clause containing the content of what was confirmed. Okay, so bear with me. Confirmed plus that equals the conclusion being validated. What follows that linguistically is not new information being discovered, it's the predetermined conclusion being locked in. There were two things that was vital to lock in. There was no argument and no fight, and he never entered the house. The entire report, their entire joint desire was to get those two things locked in. It's the predetermined conclusion. It's the confirmation. This is not a normal police report of a murder investigation. This is after the facts of Karen being arrested and arraigned, tidying up some paperwork to fit the new narrative. This is what we're seeing real time because attorney Melanie Little has exposed, with the help of other ladies who obtained it in the first place, the police report. And I understand we're going to be getting a lot of these new police reports, reports that Judge Canoni, in many instances, blocked the jury from seeing. It's all coming out. Slowly but surely, it's all coming out. And Bukhenik's police report proves, in my eyes, a deliberate strategy to effect no investigation of the house suspects or the house, and proves that no real investigation occurred other than to build a narrative that Karen Read is guilty and frame her for the murder of John O'Keefe. That's what I'm seeing in the linguistics that I'm reading. I don't know what you're seeing, but this is what I'm seeing. This is my personal opinion. Of all the information Bukhenik could have documented, of all the details from the interview, this is what gets confirmed multiple times. John O'Keefe never entered the home. And do you remember Morrissey? He never entered the home. He gave us all if you haven't seen Morrissey's lecture to us all, go and check that out. This was before the trial. This is the DA, and he's telling the community what the evidence is and what the truth is before the trial. I've never seen anything so biased in all my life. The only worst possible thing I could possibly think of is Morrissey and that Judge Cannoni being romantically involved, walking down the road hand in hand, off into the sunset, in shame. Although that bit would be good. Why this point gets locked. Of all the information Bukhenik could have documented, of all the details from the interview, this is what gets confirmed multiple times. This is the point of the police report. John O'Keefe never entered the home. This is number one lock-in. What this point eliminates: 34 Fairview as the interior crime scene. See, if they can lock this in, no need to look, is there? In fact, Lank refused to look. Lank was the lead investigator first on the scene. Refused. He said he couldn't get past the foyer. There's a dead cop on the lawn. There could be injured people inside. There could be hostages. The people at the front door could be bullshitting you because there are other people in there with guns. The house was dark. The cop was dead. You did nothing. But if they can establish this, 34 Fairview as an interior crime scene is eliminated. Any events that occurred inside the Albert home, eliminated. Any injuries inflicted inside the home, eliminated. Any confrontation with anyone inside, eliminated. And yet, what did we see at the very beginning of his report? Do you remember? Right at the very beginning, when we were doing the word by word skim, we saw this. John O'Keefe was a witness to events inside the home. This is what Bukhenik wrote when he wasn't thinking. His unconscious betrayed him. He knows everything that he knows, and typing on the keyboard, this came out. Was a witness to events inside the home. He's sensitive to what happened inside 34 Fairview. The investigative question: why is this the point that needs multiple confirmations? Why does this need confirming again and again? Why not, what time did Brian leave, need multiple confirmations? Or who was still there when Brian Higgins departed? Why doesn't that need multiple confirmations? Or what did the interior of the house look like at the end of the evening? Why doesn't that need multiple confirmations? Only this. the answer, because this point is the load-bearing wall of the official narrative. If John never entered, tell them he never entered, there can be no crime scene inside. Everything that matters is locked outside. This was their job. Those involved in the fit-up and the framing of Karen Reid, they had to get John out of the house, and effectively the house locked. It went dark, didn't it? Then Lank ended his phone call either to the chief of police or directly to Brian Albert. Don't know which hardware they were using. Jen might have lent him the phone. The phones were destroyed anyway once the court order came through. So we don't have Lank's data, we don't have Higgins's data, we don't have safely Jen's data. I don't trust her phone was properly extracted. Perhaps people with case knowledge can put in the comments more about who did that. But I understand the linguistics are worrying about Jen's mobile. All we do know is Lank's outside, the danger's gone. In other words, people who aren't Canton and aren't personal friends for over 20 years with Brian Albert. And as soon as Lank ended the phone call, 1,000, 2,000, on go the lights. Not even 3 seconds. I personally think he was talking with Jen or directly with Brian. It's safe to come out now, Brian. On go the lights. Anyway, John not being in the house is the load-bearing wall. And that's what they are only interested in confirming, not investigating. Then we have the classic word never, which I could do an entire 10-hour presentation on. Note the choice of never. Did not enter, never entered. Did not enter is a factual statement about a specific time frame, but we don't get that. We get never. And if you listen to Morrissey in his most awful of gaslighting sessions to the population of Canton, and he tells them all, John never entered the house. I don't know what he said exactly, I can't remember, but he sounded like an absolute arrogant buffoon. And I believe he, for some reason, has a reason to get involved in the conviction of Karen Reid. But he's gone now, isn't he? Morrissey. He's being kicked out, but I think he's pretending he's resigning. But really, he just knew he would never, never get re-elected after what he's done. And is it the case that who is being elected knows this case? And we've got a new sheriff in town, haven't we? We've got a new guy in charge of Canton Police, and we're about to get a new guy in charge of Boston Police. So we've got an entirely new set of decision makers, and we're getting an entirely new set of facts as discovery happens and allegiances change and people begin to feather their own nests to ensure they're not the ones holding the responsibility at the end. But never is an interesting word. Why was never chosen? Because did not enter that night still leaves room for investigation. Never entered closes every door permanently. This is the investigator effectively joining in the suspect's linguistics. And I believe this is the linguistics amongst the suspects that was texted between them. If you know more about that, do say so in the comments. The absolute language reveals the absolute need to eliminate the interior from investigation. And here's the interesting thing. That judge, Canoni, the investigators shut the house down from investigation, and the judge wouldn't allow the inside of 34 Fairview into the courtroom. Both the judge and the investigators, using the same strategy, shut down the place where the murder occurred. You couldn't make it up. And in fact, if you look at that judge's body language and linguistics, she gets extremely nervous whenever the truth is in any danger of coming out whatsoever. And the sidebars demonstrate the sort of individual that she is. And the sidebars are being covered by other channels, so I don't need to go into too much detail on those. But from what I've heard, it is in fact a linguistic goldmine, and when the time's right, when we're ready to, we're going to be showing exactly what Canoni has done. There is, by the way, one VEROSCOPE on Canoni, and it's a similar single sentence analysis where we go into this level of depth. But obviously to go into this level of depth on everything that Canoni has done in order to produce evidentiary level forensic linguistics is a bit of a task. However, we might do it. We might do it. As it is, there's one video up. Do go and check it out if you get the chance, if you haven't seen it. Canoni's one sentence analysis. And's an interesting word, the binding conjunction. It binds two separate facts into one confirmed statement. So what's being bound? Lock point 1, John never entered the home, and lock point 2, no arguments or fights at the residence. The strategic function, by joining them, both points get confirmed simultaneously, not investigated, remember. The investigation's over, even though they're meant to be doing a murder investigation. They're not. They're just filling in paperwork to confirm the narrative. One confirmation, two narrative critical facts locked down. Why the 2 points get bundled? These are not random facts bundled together. They are the only two facts that combined completely eliminate 34 Fairview as a crime scene. 1, never entered. Nothing happened to John inside. Never went inside. The only crime scene is this little bit of snow outside. We're not investigating anything else apart from this little bit of snow outside. The house is off limits. That's what they wanted to achieve. That's what they wanted to confirm. And no arguments or fights. Nothing happened to John outside either. 34 Fairview, in fact, inside and outside, is now off the list of potential crime scenes. It's no longer a crime scene because nothing happened. And this was the point of Bukhenik's report. There's also other things that went on inside that attorney's house that we may know one day, depending on who's willing to say anything. Proctor and Bukhenik in particular. Because this report isn't what went on by any shape or form. This is just the linguistic evidence of what you put in the report, but so much left out. And then we have the second lock point, the passive voice. There were no arguments or fights. Passive construction analysis. There were no arguments or fights. Brian said no one argued with John, or Higgins stated he saw no fights. But what does passive do? There were no arguments or fights. There's no actor. There's no time. There were no arguments or fights. The actor's removed. Who's been fighting? Why are you even bringing this up? It creates categorical denial, not I didn't see anything, but instead there were none. Because if you didn't say any, if you didn't see any, this is what you should say, I didn't see any. But what we're getting from the investigators is categoric and no room to come back. Just there were no arguments or fights. There's a difference. I didn't observe any fights. This is limited to the witness's perception. There were no fights. This is a categorical claim about reality itself that Bukhenik should not be assuming. Arguments or fights. Why both words? Arguments, verbal conflict, fights, physical conflict. By specifying both, Bukhenik's report eliminates any verbal confrontation that might have escalated, any physical altercation that might explain injuries. So we have the double coverage. Language reveals the comprehensive nature of what needs to be eliminated. Any form of conflict that might explain how John O'Keefe ended up dead with injuries consistent with a beating. Does that make sense? And then we have the sweeping clearance between anyone, he says. Between anyone. This clears all parties at 34 Fairview in one enormous sweep. Who gets cleared? Albert, Brian Albert, Chris Albert, Colin Albert, Matt McCabe, Jennifer McCabe, Brian Higgins, and every other person at that house that night. The investigator's sweeping statement, the efficiency, the words clear an entire party of potential suspect with one enormous broom. Because the only point of this report is to lock in the two most important things for them. He never came in the house, and there were no fights or arguments. That's all they're interested in. And then we have the location lock at the residence. And we have a final geographic boundary being put into the linguistics. This locks the clearance to 34 Fairview Road specifically. Why residence instead of house? Well, we're going to be talking about the way that law enforcement speak, etc. But we now have house, residence. So house, residence. By choosing residence, Bukhenik's language clears the entire property, not just the interior, but everywhere on the grounds where a fight might have occurred. Combined with lock point 1, never entered the home, lock point 2, no fights at the residence, creates total geographic clearance inside and outside of the property. Does that make sense? Then we have pattern convergence analysis. Do excuse me, I'm just putting the dog out. We have 12 independent forensic patterns identified in 28 words. We have the shared ownership construction, hiding in the crowd. We have the prior action admission once. We have the repetition marker again. We have the conclusion language confirmed. We have the predetermined structure. We have the absolute language, never. We have the bundling of the two lock-ins and then we have that passive voice construction, don't we? No actor. And then we have that double coverage of arguments or fights. We have the mass clearance of everyone in the entire residence, not just the house, the garage, everywhere, the entire residence. We have that geographic scope, and we have 0 investigative verbs. None. This is among the highest pattern density sentences ever analysed so far in this case. Well, I say that, apart from Higgins' sentence analysis that we did and Cannoni's sentence analysis that we did. They're probably just as bad. I can't remember the numbers, but they were pretty bad. So in the investigation universe, for example, we would expect this sort of language, asked, inquired, questioned, explored, probed, examined, learned what happened. But in the documentation universe, because this isn't an investigation, this is filling in the documents to go along with the chosen narrative. So in that scenario, we get this choice confirmed. We don't see this type of language. We just see confirmed. The word that cannot exist. In the investigation universe, confirmed has no place. Watch what happens when you try to use it. I confirmed whether John entered the home. Yeah, it doesn't sound right, does it? It's grammatically impossible. Confirmed requires certainty, whether indicates uncertainty. I asked and confirmed that John never entered. Again, it just sounds wrong, doesn't it? We confirmed that John O'Keefe never entered the home. This sentence only makes sense if the conclusion existed before the interview. Do you see their problem? Bukhenik chose this word, not us. He did. We confirmed that John O'Keefe never entered the home. This is not the language of the investigator. Now, sure, it's easy to go over our heads, and if we heard it quickly and we didn't do this active listening type of analysis, we might miss it. The sentence Bukhenik wrote is grammatically perfect. It just belongs to the wrong universe. Do you see? We confirmed that John O'Keefe never entered the home. It's perfect. And it belongs here. Not here. When an investigator documents an interview, their brain reaches for words. What words were available? What word do Bukhenik choose? This is not the language of an investigation. This is the language of confirming the narrative that's already been chosen. in the murder of a Boston cop and the framing of an innocent woman, Karen Reed. The impossible wait. 14 words used. Every one of these words belongs in an investigative report. These words here. Everyone describes what investigators actually do. Everyone was available to Bukhenik's brain, but none were selected in his report. Only one word was chosen. This word does not belong in an investigation. This word describes validation, not discovery. This word reveals process was not what it claimed. And this was the word that was selected. The scales have rendered judgment, the evidence, one word among actually not 14, because this is just an example, but thousands. But the only word that doesn't belong, that's the word Bukhenik chose. Confirmed. He's confirmed to us that there was no investigation, and he's confirmed to Karen Reed's legal team, who are taking legal action against Bukhenik, that there was no investigation. And in fact, this police report just released has strengthened Karen Reed's case tremendously. The supreme irony. The scales of justice represent the legal system's commitment to weighing the evidence fairly, following facts wherever they lead, even if you've made a conclusion before, but now you're getting more evidence. You must follow the facts wherever they lead, and discovering truth through genuine investigation, not what Bukhenik tried to fool the world with. And of course, many people were fooled and still are. But as the evidence comes out, and many of them have actually changed their minds. Well, that's not strictly true, but I know 3. Which, by the way, is a deceptive number. It's 3 or 4. 3 or 4 people I've seen write in comments that they used to think that Karen was guilty. And mind you, I'm sure there are people that used to think she was innocent that now think she's guilty. So what does that prove? Hey ho. Bukhenik was an officer of that system. His job was to investigate, to ask, to inquire, to question, to explore. Instead, confirmed. It's such a smoking gun. It presupposes the conclusion that validates rather than discovers, that locks rather than learns. It's cognitive dissonance too. The symbol of investigation reveals there was no investigation. There was no investigation. The investigator's confession. This sentence is not documentation of an investigation. It is documentation of a narrative locking exercise. What investigators do, they ask questions, they record answers, they follow leads, they explore contradictions. What Bukhenik documented, instead, 2 investigators repeatedly confirmed 2 predetermined conclusions that together eliminate 34 Fairview as a crime scene. We have no questions about what actually occurred inside the house, even though they started the report wrong document. with this, a witness to events inside the home. And then once that was written, and by the way, this was the very beginning of the report, once this was written, they then abandoned this and never came back to it again. 34 Fairview inside became locked down. The word confirmed is the confession. You cannot accidentally write confirmed when you mean asked or investigated. The brain chooses confirmed because that's what the brain knows is happening. Bukhenik's own language reveals he understood the purpose of this interview, not to discover what happened, but to document that nothing happened. At least nothing at 34 Fairview Road. The questions this sentence answers. What was the purpose of interviewing Brian Higgins? A. To confirm specific points that clear 34 Fairview as a crime scene. Question. Was this an investigation or a documentation exercise? Answer. Documentation. Investigators don't confirm, they investigate. Bukhenik's word choice reveals the true nature of the process. Question. Why were the same points confirmed multiple times? To lock them into the official record. Repetition establishes narrative permanence. Question. What information was not documented? Arrival times, departure times, who was there, where, when, what they did, what they drank, who left first, who left second, what the inside of the house looked like, what conversations happened, where were they, where John was like, etc. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Instead, they're gossiping. And this, I mean, we don't actually know what happened because Bukhenik certainly isn't going to put the truth in. I mean, there's a certain point where he talks about the atmosphere changing. I haven't covered that yet. But he covers his back just in case it comes out. It's subtle, but it's in there. Perhaps I will analyse that. But I'm sure there are so much more documents about to come out. I'd love to get my hands on more because we've already covered a lot of this. We've shown what this is, showing more and more and more of what this is. Probably a useful exercise if it's needed in the courtrooms, but for us, we already know. But we'll finish this report just to see how much more intelligence we can get. So the 28-word sentence, through systematic molecular word-by-word analysis, reveals itself to be the linguistic signature of an investigation that was not investigating. This is the pattern. Instead, we've got a narrative being confirmed by the two named investigators. And the lock points that they really want to confirm is John O'Keefe never entered the home, as per Morrissey's gaslighting to us, and no arguments or fights between anyone at the residence. That was the entire point of this report, just to get those two lock-ins in. A complete waste of time. And then we have the combined effect, the total clearance of 34 Fairview Road as a location where anything happened to John O'Keefe. So, the revelation. Sergeant Yuri Bukhenik's word choices expose that this interview was designed to document predetermined conclusions, not to discover new information. His brain knew what process he was engaged in and confirmed emerged because confirmation, not investigation, was occurring. Investigators don't confirm, they investigate. This word choice is the investigator's confession. So amazing how much detail we can go into on just a sentence, isn't it? I mean, how long have we been going for? I know the dog wants his dinner. The verdict chamber. Exhibit A, Sergeant Bukhenik. Shared ownership construction. It's a compound subject construction. It distributes responsibility between the two named investigators. Once again, it's that temporal admission. Once again, we don't know how many times, but it's once again confirmed. You cannot confirm what you don't already believe, can you? Can anyone confirm what you don't already believe? This is the smoking gun and the beginning of the frame of Karen Reed. The psychology of the detectives isn't to investigate, it's to confirm their narrative. Investigators ask, inquire, question, and explore. We've got confirmers. The single word reveals the entire interview was designed to validate existing beliefs, not discover new information. The brain reached for confirmed because confirmation, not investigation, was occurring. And this is the wonderful thing that you begin to realize when you learn forensic linguistics and statement analysis. The brain is truthful, and because it's truthful that it reveals the patterns to us and we can see the deception. Isn't that wonderful? The liar who owns the brain has a truthful brain that works against him or her and shows us the patterns that know where to look. That, the certainty marker, confirms that, and it introduces a fact being validated, not a question being explored. John O'Keefe. We have full name usage. Never. Never is absolute. Entered the home. This is the lock point. Okay, I won't go through all of them because we already have. But hopefully, each of these separated, if you've stayed with me this long, you can now see the level of intelligence which we can begin to explore using the molecular system of analysis. So I think that brings us to the end of today's VEROSCOPE. The conclusion, this sentence is the linguistic signature of an investigator who was not investigating. Sergeant Yuri Bukhenik's automatic word choices reveal that on February the 3rd, 2022, the interview with Brian Higgins was conducted to document predetermined conclusions, not to discover new information or investigate. The word confirmed is indeed the investigator's own confession. If you strip everything away, what remains? What remains? Well, we've got 12 patterns. What do investigators do? Think about it. This is what we are expecting. And this is what we got. They already know the answer as far as they're concerned. So there we are. That's the VEROSCOPE report of the single sentence in the brand new police report that we've got. And if you would like me to do more single sentence reports, do say so in the comments. I'm more than happy to do them. Or if there are other cases that you would like me to analyze and look at, do add those in the comments as well. I've got a long list. I apologize for taking so long to get around to them, but I'm trying to complete some of the cases we've already got on the go first. I thought that would make sense. Okay, chat to you in the comments. Oh, and please remember, if you haven't, do like the video.